Warning, this story is super graphic, so if you don't want to hear anything super graphic and disturbing, please close off. It started when I was 10. The neighbor's cat hated me. She hissed and clawed on my ankles as I walked home from school. I was afraid to kick her away though. The owner was my mom's best friend, and I feared punishment if either one of them saw. But I hated that cat, and I knew I had to punish her. I decided I would crush up a few of my mom's aspirin and put some in the leftovers that my mom made me give to her every night. I didn't think it would kill her, but if I'm honest with myself, I'm glad she was gone. I wish I had stopped there, but sadly it didn't. What had started with the cat grew into a hatred for all animals, all living things even. I killed dogs, raccoons, rabbits, it didn't even matter. I learned quickly that it's much more satisfying when you kill with knives instead of poison. I delighted in the feeling of a knife diving deep into flesh. I felt strong, fearless, things I had never felt when I was a mere child, fearing punishment. When I was 16 or so, something changed. I was never popular in school, but people stopped talking to me. They whispered when they thought I couldn't hear that I was a freak. They were right to be afraid. The animals were no longer enough for me. I needed something more, something bigger. So I decided I would kill my little sister Julia. My parents decided to go out one warm June evening, leaving me in charge of her. She was only 5, but I envied her. She who got all the attention, she who at such a young age had more friends than I ever had. So when my parents left, I sat her in front of the television and planned. Close to dinner time, I asked her if she wanted to go for a short walk. I brought a backpack saying that we could have dinner in the small clearing about half a mile into the woodland that spilled out for miles. That began the minute's walk from the backyard. We weren't usually allowed in the woods, though it was where I usually trapped and killed animals. So she was excited. While she was getting dressed, I packed. I put a serrated knife, a thick tablecloth, rubber gloves, a roll of duct tape, of which I ripped a small strip, a change of clothes and shoes and scissors. We set off down the narrow path through the trees. When we finally reached the clearing, I let her walk ahead of me. I grabbed the strip of duct tape I had ripped off when we were at the house. I walked up close behind her and put it over her mouth. Holding her still with one hand, I put on the gloves. I pushed her to the ground, binding her ankles and wrists with the tape. I placed her on the tablecloth, putting her as close to the middle as I could with her squirming. Cutting her clothes was easier than I thought. She dressed in a thin tank top because of the warm weather. I took out the knife and plunged it into her stomach slowly, savoring the feeling as the serrated edge tore through her soft skin, rippling through her organs, streams of blood gushing out as I pulled it out just as slowly. Then pushed it in again, faster and faster, not stopping until her muffled cries and the rise and fall of her chest had ceased. I carried her body to the deep river nearby and dumped it carefully into the current. After I had walked back, I took off the gloves and pulled my clothes from the bag and stuffed the soiled tablecloth and the remains of my sister and shirt in, changing quickly as I put my now stained and dirty clothes in the pack. On my walk home, I decided I should dump the bag in the dumpster at least a street away. When I finally returned home, I cooked a quick dinner of canned beef stew for my parents and waited. They came home only an hour after I had. "Where's your sister?" my mother had asked. She sat down at the table while my father hung up their coats. I told her she had gone for a walk, and I wasn't sure when she'd be back. She looked at me wide-eyed. "You let your sister go for a walk by herself?" "Well, yeah, she's pretty smart. I'm sure she'll be fine," I replied, trying to stay calm. "She's 5. I can't believe you would be that irresponsible," she said, looking at my father. "How long has she been gone?" I looked at the clock, repressing my anger. I had done this for them. How could they not see how much of a burden she was? "I guess half an hour. I haven't really been watching the time." My mom stood up and grabbed my father's arms with tears in her eyes. "Honey, go call the police. She's been gone for too long. What if something happened to her?" My father took out his cell phone and dialed 911, walking to Julia's bedroom and sitting on her bed. He came out a few minutes later and said they were looking for her. They believed me, I thought. We spent the next half hour waiting silently around the kitchen table when a knock came to the door. Father jumped to open it. "Yes, did you find her?" he asked hopefully. "I'm sorry, sir, but we found your daughter's body in a stream in the woods behind your house," the policeman replied. My mother broke down sobbing. My father knelt, attempting to console her. I did my best to look sad and a little confused, as if I couldn't believe it was happening. The policeman informed them that they would investigate, but I doubt they'll be caught. Nobody would think even I, the freak, the lonely outcast, would kill his own sister. And that's not even the good part. I found out Mom's going to have a baby, and I can't wait to be a big sister again. It was December 20th, 1996. Scream had just released, and my friend was practically pushing me out the door. We loaded into my car and began the long drive to the cinemas. He was blabbering on for so long, I had to drown out his voice as we drove. I just rolled the windows down, hoping I wouldn't hear his voice. We turned down the road and got to the main road that led to the cinemas. After we got there, my friend opened the car door and ran to the cinema, before the car even came to a stop. I parked the car and tried to catch up with him. I soon found him at the concession stand, buying popcorn and soda. We paid for our tickets and walked down the hall to the room showing Scream. We found 2 empty seats way in the back, so we sat down and waited for the movie to start. The lights in the room soon dimmed down and the movie started playing, so we focused our attention on the movie. 30 minutes go by and I started to notice something kind of odd. My friend had been staring at the screen the whole time, not blinking. He didn't even touch his popcorn and soda yet, which would have been gone by now, and he would be heading back to the concession stand. I just brushed it off thinking he wasn't really focused. I just ignored it and continued watching the movie. By the time the movie was over, the sun was setting. We both got back in my car and began the drive back home. I noticed that my friend hadn't said anything since the movie started. And now, I started to notice this, and I couldn't ignore it. I dropped my friend off and just drove home, not saying bye. When I got home, I hopped out of the car and got inside to go to bed early. A couple days go by and I haven't heard from my friend. I start to worry about him. As I begin to leave, my friend calls me. "Hello?" I asked. Suddenly my friend's voice came through the phone, but his voice was deeper.
"What's your favorite scary movie?"
I laughed at my friend's crappy ghost face impression and began talking. "All right, Gary. Good job, but you're not scary," I said. Gary laughed and hung up. I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of freaked out. And then suddenly the power in my house went out. I quickly ran upstairs and locked myself in my room, hiding under my bed. Then I'll never forget what I heard. Footsteps on the first floor, walking into every room down there. Quietly, I snuck to my window and opened it. Slipping out of the small crack, I fell to the ground and hurt my arm. But due to the adrenaline pumping through my body, I felt nothing. I started sprinting across the street to my neighbor's house. I knocked until a middle-aged woman answered. Out of breath, I asked the lady to use her phone. She seemed worried and let me use it, and no doubt she got more worried when I called the cops saying there was somebody in my house. 30 minutes go by and I watched 2 police cars pull up onto the lawn and rush inside the house, pulling Gary out 10 minutes later, dressed in a ghost face costume, holding the mask in one hand and a knife in the other. I walked across the street to the police when one of them pulls me aside so they can talk to me. "Son, we need you to see something." They led me to a car parked in the alley by my house, Gary's car. I walked over to it and opened the car door. Inside was a camera and multiple pictures that made my skin crawl. Over the past 4 days, Gary had been sneaking around my house, taking pictures of me and inside of my house. I grabbed the camera and saw a recording on it. It was about 50 seconds long, so I pressed play and watched. This is what happened. Gary pulled up behind my house, wearing a ghost face mask and holding a knife. He set the camera up behind the dash on his car and recorded himself cutting the power to the house. He soon began to try to open the back door, and it was unlocked. He walked inside, and that was when I heard him walking around the first floor. Then the video ended. The cop faces me and begins talking. "Don't worry, I doubt he'll be out anytime soon. It's been a year since that happened. I haven't gone to the cinema since." The first person I ever drove was my mother. A few days after her funeral, she came to me while I slept. I was blurry-eyed and still half asleep when I agreed, fetching my keys and muttering to the car. It was only once I was in the car that I realized what was happening. She didn't speak much, just said she needed to go to the airport. That's how they all are. I found only half aware. They asked to go to the airport or ferry or sometimes the train station. They show up in the dead of night or in the early morning dawn, standing alongside my bed. Once I get them to where they want to go, they just sort of disappear. I guess it's their way of moving on. Most are peaceful and calm. They had died of old age or some sickness. Sometimes, though, very rarely, they'd die of some tragic accident. They would appear in a manner they died, broken, torn apart. That became my life until I met Harriet. She was my light, and together we had a child named Thomas. I still continue to drive, not often, just a few times a week. Harriet knew, of course, and she told me she understood, though sometimes I felt as though if she were simply humoring me. And then Thomas died. We knew it was coming. Leukemia. He was diagnosed too late. Not long after his 7th birthday, he lived for 2 more months. I took to drinking, hard, but it completely broke Harriet. She would sit up late at night, staring into the darkness at the end of our bed. I'd drink downstairs until I passed out, but one night she found me there. She woke me, clawing at my shirt, her eyes bright, frantic. "Sam, you'll see him when he comes to you? You'll see him? Let me speak with him? Sam, please?" I told her that I'd never seen a child. Only people our own age or older. She wouldn't believe me. She started screaming. She got violent. I had to leave. I had to. I couldn't take it. But I wasn't in any condition to drive. I woke in the hospital, barely lucid. Machines hooked to my flesh, wires threaded through my veins. But Harriet was there. I saw her through the haze as the doctors surrounded me, as they fought to keep me alive. The police were there too, asking questions that I couldn't answer. Through it all, Harriet stood beside me. It was days later that I finally woke, in the dead of night, still in the hospital. I turned to my side. Harriet was there. I reached out to her. I asked what happened. For a long moment she was quiet. Finally she reached out to me. It was then I noticed that the skin of her wrist had parted. Her arm bloodied. Her hand slipped through mine. "Sam," she spoke softly, "I need a ride."
On July 16, 1945, the United States government executed Project Trinity. Project Trinity was the first nuclear weapons test in history. Taking place in the New Mexican desert, the military, specifically the Army, oversaw conducting this weapons test and ensuring they found a completely secluded location to do so, a place with virtually no inhabitants. What the Army failed to do was to completely check each and every cave and ravine in that desolate wasteland, but we'll come back to that soon enough. Let me tell you a different story in order to set the proper mood. This is a story of what happens when things don't go quite according to plan. There are certain times in history when a baby is born different from the rest. Some are naturally more intelligent, some are simply more attractive. Some, however, have differences that are not appealing. Extra fingers or toes, for example. The lack of an eye, a humpback, all of these things are called mutations by the modern world. Back in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, mutant were the pariah of society. Parents would abandon them at churches. People would jeer and spit at them as they passed by. It was only in solitude or in a group of similar persons that they found peace. Communes began springing up in different parts of the country. All secluded parts of the country, such as deserts, underground caves, or small islands off the coast. They were the refuges for the outcasts of society. That all changed in 1945. Project Trinity was the starting point for a couple of significant things. Obviously, it was a trigger of the end of World War II and the massive arms race against the USSR during the Cold War. Also, it was the beginning of a massive genocide you may otherwise never have known about. Near the blast site of Trinity was a community of nearly 45 mutants. All of them were killed instantly by the destructive power unleashed in that first successful blast. In 1946, there were 2 more test fires on a commune in the Marshall Islands in 1951. Another blast in the Pacific region caused severe radiation sickness and death to another large group of mutants. In 1952, Operation Ivy Mike killed over 150 mutants on another small Pacific island. The final documented test detonation took place on March 1st, 1954. This blast condemned Castle Bravo and was the most detrimental of all. After discovering how many mutants had moved back to the Marshall Islands, the government decided it was time to make their point finalized. They detonated a 15 megatron bomb in shallow water just off the island shore. Radioactive water vapor and bits of metal entered the atmosphere around the island and fell back into its shores. The death toll was nearly 120 mutants. Men, women, and children all suffered from radiation sickness. Many developed cancers and spent the rest of their short lives in pain. The lucky ones were killed by falling bits of metal from the sky. What the government doesn't know is that some mutants, not many, but some of us, survived.
In rural southern Illinois, a toy company began selling realistic baby dolls to expectant mothers. But apparently after the mother had the child, the toy would start crying. Eventually the rocking motion advertised to calm it down wouldn't work. and you couldn't get it to stop crying without shaking it. Eventually, when it started crying, the parent would have to beat it, and the beatings and thrashings would have to get harder and harder to get it to be quiet. The only thing that seemed to shut the baby doll up permanently was to bash its head against the wall to destroy whatever mechanism triggered the crying. On more than one occasion, though, neighbors called the authorities to report child abuse, and when the police arrived, they found the bloody remains of infants smeared across the walls and the floor. In most cases, the mother couldn't understand why the police were there. She just got rid of the stupid doll as she rocked the baby-shaped bundle in her arms.